Hello, all of you. Good afternoon. My name is Max. I'm a policy fellow here at das Progressive Zentrum, and I'm going to be the host of this afternoon's sessions on tech for society. What we're going to do in this session is a kind of special thing because this is the start of a series of 3 workshops we are actually going to do on the question, how can we as progressives, be it like in government, in business, or in society, basically shape technological progress and technological change in a way that it is to society's benefit, basically, right? And I guess it's kind of a basic conviction of progressives that we cannot be anti-technology. But at the same time, I don't know how you feel, but there is some kind of obsession with innovation and disruption going around, right? And sometimes it seems you can win every argument on the stage when you talk about being more innovative, being more disruptive. But to progressive forces in society, technological change is not an end in itself, right? It is about using new technologies to tackle the challenges our societies are basically facing. And it's about bold thinking and forming broad alliances to this end. And therefore we started this series, which is called Tech for Society, with a couple of fantastic partners supporting us. And there are going to be 2 more workshops in the future, one on tech and the individual and tech and society. And today we are basically focusing on technology and business, technology and our economic system. And we basically kicked off this series last November. And what we're going to do today is kind of a setting where Rob Atkinson is giving us some kind of scene-setting remarks. Rob is the president of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. And as we briefly chatted a bit before we started this kind of stream is, these are the partners, thank you, is that Rob wrote a paper in 2008, which is about when you basically invest as a government in terms of crises. It should be a kind of investment that is timely, temporary, targeted, but also transformative. And this kind of quadruple T framing really got famous and really was being used to bring forward an argument within different kind of institutions of German government, how to react in the current crisis. So I'm really, really happy to have Rob in this conversation. And after having this brief remarks of about like 10 minutes by Rob, there will be a brief impulse by Svenja Falk. Svenja is a managing director at Accenture. She wrote a book about how German industries are basically performing in the digital age. And I got to learn Svenja as someone who's really into kind of the intimate workings of the German economy, of German industries, of the kind of platforms, the kind of, you know, alliances that are basically being built within the German economy to prepare itself for a digital future. So I'm very happy that Svenja is with us today. And then Danyal, someone who I really like and adore, is someone who's bringing some kind of fresh energy into the German Bundestag. He's a management consultant turned MP for the Green Party. He's someone who is kind of pushing for fresh thinking within the Green Party when it comes to the startup scene, when it comes to using technological innovation for a better society. And he is someone who is not shy of having an argument with any kind of person. So I'm really happy to have Danyal with us in this conversation. After these kind of 3 brief, you know, let's say setting the scene impulses from you 3, we're going to have a very brief Q&A. And then we're going to start a second part of this session, which will be for those people who are registered on the platform, where we will basically break into 3 different breakout groups, discussing a little bit more in detail different aspects we touched upon in our discussion. And Daniela Blaschke and Lutz Mache, also policy fellows here at das Progressive Zentrum, will facilitate these breakout sessions. So now, without further ado, I would like to ask Rob Atkinson to start his 10 minutes impulse on basically what could be the role of technology, and particularly how should governments in the current situation act in shaping technology to the end of using kind of crisis measures, economic crisis measures, to actually transform our economies to be more productive, more efficient, but also more inclusive and more equitable. So Rob, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you, Max. It's really a pleasure to be here and join with you on this really critical question of how governments are going to respond to the COVID economic crisis. You mentioned the report that ITIF wrote about, I guess in 2008, the 4 T's, timely, targeted, temporary, and transformative. Back then, the US Congress and the Obama administration took that to heart. There were a number of provisions in this big stimulus package that the government passed, including billions of dollars for health IT, making our electric grid smarter, spurring research and development, and broadband. I think these are even more important today as we go forward. Obviously, I think it's important to have these initiatives being timely. You want to get the impact while the economy is still in a slump, and it looks like the economy could, depending on where you are, stay in a slump for a fairly long period of time. This is a huge crisis. Should be targeted on the most important things, especially with high employment multipliers. Should be temporary so that we're not putting in place permanent initiatives. This is a one-time response, really. And then what I want to talk about is transformative. Using these initiatives to spur or to transform existing systems and industries and jobs through technology. So one of the key issues today, obviously, is we really have an economy that's pretty bifurcated now, where on the one hand, you have a lot of workers who can do their jobs with little face-to-face interaction. People like us who can, sit at home. I assume many of you are at home and work and still be employed. And then there's a whole set of other workers who don't have that luxury, and they're forced to be in positions that they have to be engaged in other in activities with others. And I think that's an important component of this. How can we make the economy more resilient, including by, frankly, greater automation of some of these jobs and use of technology? So that's the first thing I want to talk about. I think one of the dynamics where I think progressives maybe have gotten this a little bit wrong over the last decade is there's this view that productivity is no longer an important progressive goal. And if you look back at the progressive movement, really from the 50s all the way through the 80s, it was pretty clear that one of the goals was high productivity, with the idea that those benefits would accrue to workers. And some of that has fallen short in the sense that we don't have as tight a link between productivity and incomes as we used to, but it's still not totally severed. But the bigger problem, at least in the US, but also really in the OECD countries in general, is we've had this big, giant slowdown in productivity growth. US productivity growth today is the slowest it's been probably in history, but certainly since 1947 when we started measuring this. And that's the principal reason why wage growth has been so slow in the US. So there's a whole set of technologies now that are emerging, what oftentimes in Germany is referred to as Industry 4.0, or a whole set of technologies that are digital, not just in manufacturing. And so we can imagine a whole set of technologies that make jobs safer and more productive in industries like restaurants, automated ordering and service. You ought to be able to go into a restaurant, order what you want on a tablet, have a little robot come out and deliver it. We're seeing this now in retail stores with robotic floor cleaning and ultimately robotic stocking of goods, autonomous mobile robots for warehouses, automated trucks, automated taxis. These are all going to be important technologies going forward, and governments can play a key role, a number of different roles there. One is competitive grants help companies with experiments in automation. Funding, at least in Germany, Fraunhofer Institutes, we're funding more of them to focus on next generation robotics, and the temporary tax incentives to help companies roll out these kinds of new technologies. Now, obviously, we can't have that conversation without a parallel conversation of that we need to have much more effective worker training and adjustment policies. And I can't speak for Germany. I can only speak for the US, where our system is frankly pretty abysmal, pretty bad. It doesn't do anywhere near what we need to do for helping workers make transitions. So that has to be part and parcel of any overall system, and frankly, any short-term system. The second big part of this is really having the state play an important role for inclusive technological transformation. I was really pleased to see the German government announce a $50 billion, and I'm going to get this completely wrong, Zukunftspaket, package for the future. And there's really a lot of great things in that package from our view, helping make sure that all regions of the country, especially high-cost rural regions, can get a broadband. You know, COVID may not be, it probably won't be the last, unfortunately, pandemic where we have to have more activity from home, including schooling. And it's really, really difficult to be able to do that unless every household has adequate broadband. And so having funding programs to make that a reality is pretty critical. You know, we can do that now because we have broadband. Essentially anything that would be rolled out is going to be more than adequate for a long, long time going forward. 5G, which is mostly going to be a mobile or nomadic technology, again, that should be rolled out to all regions, and there's parts of that package in there. There's other components of the of a next-gen digital infrastructure that we've given, I think, short shrift to, but widespread electronic health records. You know, as we're in a world where you're not going to go to the doctor as much, you might want to have more telehealth consultations with medical experts and providers, making sure that we have widespread electronic health records that patients have some control over and have the ability to do analytics on with some third-party analytics companies. That's going to be pretty important. Electronic IDs, the idea that you have to go out of your house now to sign a legal document, that's 20th century technology. But most places, most countries don't have that widespread digital infrastructure. Places like Estonia, which we all know about, they've done that for over a decade, and pretty much every Estonian citizen can sign a document remotely. They can attest to themselves electronically remotely. We need to be able to do that in every country. Smart city technology, we're really at the cusp of a whole set of technologies, including 5G, but also Internet of Things technology, and cheap, ubiquitous, flexible sensors that can be used to make our cities work more effectively and provide real intelligence to managers in cities to how they're operating and how they can be made even better. And finally, you know, transforming government. I don't know how many of you have run across or seen what happened in the US when we had the massive unemployment and we had massive filings. Workers who were unemployed filed for unemployment insurance, and our state systems simply could not handle that. They crashed, you couldn't get on, and it was because they had frankly never moved to the cloud, many of them. They were running these systems on their own discrete servers, which is again a 20th century technology. So many governments are still using outdated legacy system, COBOL programmed mainframes. You know, no sophisticated company, no SAP, Mercedes, they would never use technologies like that. And yet all too often governments are. So there's an important opportunity to, you know, get government up to speed and up into the 2020s, if you will. And then also to be using technologies like AI, open data, cloud computing, robotic process automation, mobile-friendly systems. It's striking in the US, again, I don't know about Germany, the significant share of government websites that are not designed to be mobile-friendly, and yet a significant share of Americans, particularly lower-income Americans, that's the only way they get online. And if you don't have governments designed around a mobile platforms, mobile interfaces. So again, big opportunities to use this to transform government, which would create employment and at the same time make it easier to address this crisis as well as any crisis coming forward and spur economic growth. So Max, with that, I'll stop and look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rob. For all of you who are like more interested in the thoughts by Rob Atkinson, I really highly recommend an op-ed he wrote for Der Tagesspiegel. I think like it was published yesterday or today. So check it out on Der Tagesspiegel. Now I would like to move on to Svenja Falk and particularly ask her about, firstly, like how is the German economy being hit by the current situation, obviously, but also if government is intervening in terms of stimulating the economy, how should this stimulation be shaped that actually leads to a modernization of our industries in a most encompassing sense?
Yeah, thank you very much, Max. Yeah, and thank you, Rob, for these great starting remarks. I would like to comment a little bit on the overall economic impact and what we can expect. There are obviously a number of known unknowns. Will there be a second outbreak? How long will the uptake take? What will be happening to consumer spending, to investments? And of course, a second part, which is, I believe, far more important. So will the global decoupling continue? What will happen to our supply chains? What is the future of globalization, which is obviously for a country like Germany, which is one of the most open economies in the world, of utmost importance. So if you could please share the slide that I had shared.
Should be happening now.
Perfect. So what we try to do in order to sort of talk about things that we cannot foresee now is to develop scenarios. And what you can see here is a sort of a 2x2 assumptions that looks at the disease progression and as well as the societal responses. At the bottom of the curve, you can see sort of the economic impact. On the top, you see sort of the development of the disease. And you can see some sort of familiar patterns when you look at the rapid remission, for example, that reminds us at the V curve that we saw in the financial crisis in Canada. It's a very steep, sharp decline, and then it went up again. The US had more, which you can see more on the right, so more of a U curve. So it took much longer for them to get out, and they were in the bottom much longer. And then you had what you can see here on the prolonged chaos. This was what you saw in Greece, sort of what is called an L curve, and obviously the same with far more sort of pronounced economic impacts when you look at the cyclical outbreaks. So I think we are yet unclear what will happen economically. However, sort of the forecasts for the economic output this year tend to be quite daunting, and they can continue to be sort of calculated down. One of the latest estimates from Oxford Economics is that the global economy will shrink this year by 4.8%. There are, of course, huge variations. 7 in the US, 5.9 here in Germany, and a small increase of 0.8 in China. However, this crisis is very different because it's not the economic stuff. It's a public health crisis, it's a political crisis, and it's an economic crisis, it's a globalization crisis, it's all of that together. What companies have done is they have provided the largest ever seen monetary and fiscal response in modern times. So at the moment, we have 9 trillion of COVID-19 packages, including sort of guarantees, loans, and spending out there. This is amazing. Again, here we see huge differences. Germany, we have always been asked to spend. Now we do 34% of GDP, 11 in the US, and very interesting in China, it's only 2.5%. But what China is doing is they are doing very, very targeted spending. They have used the crisis as test bed to test their ambitions around the Internet Plus, the China 2025 strategy, and are investing right now already in order to close sort of the shortcomings of their infrastructure. Technological infrastructure is about to define competitiveness of countries in the future, and China aims to have 600,000 5G base stations by end of 2025. How many do we have in Germany? Is it 1,700 or so? And aims to pull that up to over 5 million by 2025, launching AI testbed and installing some undisclosed numbers of data centers to enable the push to the cloud, which is actually providing the scale and the ability to have new business models in the future. So we should worry about the economy, we should worry about the healthcare system, but we should worry more in the mid and long term about our competitiveness, because we need to address the shortcomings of the technological infrastructure and the scalable business models that we have. Thank you very much.
Svenja, thank you so much for your remarks. I would now go over to Danyal and maybe ask him firstly, like Danyal, when you look at the stimulus package the German government has just crafted, how satisfied are you with its transformativeness?
First of all, Max, thank you for having me on this. Always a pleasure to talk to you. And of course, I mean, the stimulus package is taking a lot of resources, a lot of time, and we're debating it currently. It will be in the German in the committees tomorrow, and it will be in the parliament at the end of the week. And I think, first of all, I mean, I'm from the opposition, but both of us, we are progressives. I hope we sort of fight for the same things. I think it is the start of something. Of course, when we talk about a stimulus package, it's about short-term driving up the economy, right? So lowering the value-added tax, giving some money for businesses to support them short-term and so on. I mean, I think that's the right thing to do in order to stabilize the economy on a short term. But on the other hand, I think we have to ask ourselves not only how do we rescue the year of 2020, but what do we have to do in order to prepare for 2030, right? And I think that's when it also comes to the question of transformation of our economy. And from that perspective, I hope the stimulus package is a start, it is a beginning. And what we need is continuous investments over the next course of the decade. And I hope that progressives together can work on this. So when I think of transforming the economy, what comes to my mind is, and that's something that we have to bring together. And I think this is a very new way of thinking progressive politics, is that competitiveness of our businesses on the one hand and sustainability on the other hand. And when I talk about sustainability, I'm referring to inclusive growth, so the social aspects, but also the ecological perspective, meaning using less of our resources. And what we need, and I think that's the strength, not only of Germany, but also of Europe, is also giving a smart framework of regulating this economy. Of course, when we talk about regulation, when we talk to Americans, it's always, you guys, you're not talking about real innovations. You talk about data protection and regulatory stuff and like that, stuff like that. But I'm very much convinced when you look at the GDPR, at the General Data Protection Regulation from the European perspective, it was not only a regulatory piece, I think it was also a transformative piece in setting standards. How do we want to organize the digital world? And I think that's also a strength, yeah? And that's, I think, also a way that progressive Europeans should go further. And today's a special day, Max, as you know, and many others. I guess a lot of have already downloaded the Corona app. I think it's a perfect example of bringing together innovation, technology, but also a policy issue, and a public health issue at the same time. And I think this is a good example in order to show how also innovation and technology can provide at least some sort of instruments in order to solve global or public problems. And I think when we come to this, I think startups play an important role. And in preparing this conversation, you also asked me what are the strengths, maybe what are the special the special circumstances that we face in Germany. Of course, we have important startup hubs like Munich or Berlin, but I think what really is the core of Germany is that we have 16 states and a lot of communities, and we should also foster a more decentral approach, because as we heard already in one of the previous talks, is that resilience is an asset. And I think when we talk about decentrality in complex systems, resilience is there much in favor. And so our job also in politics is how can we organize a decentral ecosystem of small and medium-sized companies, of universities, together with startups, in order also to connect rural areas with cities when it comes to innovation and to inclusive growth. Maybe one thing I'd like to add, because I think this is also something where progressives fall short a little bit. I'm in big favor also to bringing innovation to public services and to public administrations. And I think this is also a chance, especially for rural areas. So one of the tasks that we have in politics is to make public tenders more flexible. I meet a lot of great founders, and they have great ideas on transportation, on medtech, on green tech, on AI, and so on. And they say they can't participate in public tenders because your business needs to be at the market for 10 years. You need to have done more than, I don't know, 10 projects and so many revenues and so on. And so they actually are excluded from public tenders. And I think we should be more flexible to really bring innovation to the core of democracy, which are public institutions. And when you look, for example, a very critical topic that we are discussing currently, Max, and where no stimulus package is helping, that's the education system, the digital education system. I know it's a big headache for many people out there. And this is also what Corona is showing to us, where are the deficits in the system. And I think when we want to catch up, I think we need to bring also smart ideas from the outside, from small and medium companies, from startups and so on, into the public attention. And that means also to public institutions. But it's not only about education, it's our tax offices, it's the employment agency, it's mobility services, and so on. I think this would be a big advantage, not only for businesses, but also for rural areas. And that's why I'm fighting for opening up public tender programs for smaller and medium-sized companies, even though they are not at the market that many years. But I think they bring smart ideas to the table. And maybe a closing remark: innovation is not only about technological innovation. I think it's also about social innovation. It's about cultural innovation and also a change of behavior. And we see that a society is able to change its behavior currently in this crisis. This is not a good thing, because this is by force, but we should change the sides of the medal and maybe add more positive incentives in order also to bring these different aspects of innovation together. And then I'm positive that the stimulus package could be a good start. We need to keep working on that, not only about 2020, it's also about 2030. And maybe one last sentence, Max, because I know the time is over. I think we have to together as progressive to shape a positive narrative. I think this is the advantage of the populists. They have a really easy narrative they tell out there. Close the borders, no migration, and we want the good old times that have never been there. And I think we have to put something against it. And I think this could be a positive narrative. What society we want in the year of 2030, and how can technological innovation help to foster this growth and to reach these goals?
Thank you, Daniel. I think these are all like very, very valid observations. I would like to do like one round of questions, which are basically collected from the participants, and then we're gonna start our breakout sessions. I'm gonna start with Rob Atkinson, and the question, I mean, in the current situation, how do you make a decision as a government, what kind of technologies to invest in? Like specifically the question is because in the German stimulus package, there's basically one bullet about a 2 billion investment into quantum technologies. And as all of us who are like a little bit in the know, do know that a quantum computer is nothing you can buy at the next corner shop, right? I mean, it's a technology in development. So the question basically is, how ripe, how ready do technologies have to be for governments really to make the bet to invest in these technologies with public resources in times of crisis? That would be the question to Rob Atkinson.
Sure. Look, the reality is it's as Obama's chief of staff once said, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And so here's a crisis. Hey, why don't we use it to invest in quantum? That's fine. I mean, that's politics. I get it. You're right. I mean, I think there's really two things that you want to have. You want to have technologies that are ready to go. So 5G is ready to go. 2 years ago, you wouldn't invest in 5G. It's not ready. Now it's ready to be deployed. Broadband, e-government, all of these other technologies we talk about, they're all ready to go. If you put money into them, companies will spend money. I mean, they'll invest, they'll deploy them, they'll hire workers, et cetera, et cetera. Quantum is not like that. You'll employ some research scientists, which is useful, but it's not the same thing. The second I would argue is you want to invest in technologies where you're not going to get them otherwise. And maybe to be a little controversial, I wouldn't put cloud computing in that category. There are lots of companies out there that will provide all the cloud computing that Germany needs. I think the question is, things like 5G, you've got a lot of companies, you got a lot of carriers, but they won't invest in rural areas in 5G. They're not going to invest in things like digital signatures. So that's a sort of a quasi-public good. So I think there again, things that are quasi-public goods, things that are ready to go, things that aren't going to get invested in otherwise, those would be to me the sort of sweet spot of areas that governments should focus on.
Perfect. Thank you, Rob. Now, question to Danyal. I mean, when I got you right, I mean, you basically said that we should not leave concepts like productivity and competitiveness to the, let's say, more liberal part in the economic sense of the political spectrum, but rather develop a progressive vision about competitiveness, about productivity. But as all of us know, particularly when it comes to Europe, it doesn't really make sense to develop, like national productivity strategies, because productivity is very much an issue on regional level, but also on the level of the big economic bloc, so to say, right? So what would be your ideas for developing, let's say, a European productivity strategy that really looks at the divergences in productivity when it comes to the different regions within Europe?
That's a good question, Max, and it's not easy to answer. First of all, I think we have to go the first step, and you're absolutely right. We need a European strategy. For example, when I look at the German Minister of the Economy, Peter Altmaier, who has pushed forward several topics, and I'm thankful for that. There was the topic on industrial policy, let's take his strategy for AI, and we have an enquete commission in the German Bundestag dealing with AI. All of these strategies, there is the word national in there. Yeah, we need a national industrial policy strategy. We need a national strategy for AI. I mean, first of all, the first step is for politics to understand that we need European strategies for that. And I'm glad it's a good thing that the German government is leading the European Council in the second half of this year. I think this would be a great advantage of pushing forward this topic. And let's go back to the startups, which I mentioned earlier. Why don't we have the ecosystem that is comparable to other regions of the world, like Israel or the United States? I mean, there are several reasons. We have to attract more venture capital and so on. But I think one of the main reasons is because ideas stop currently at the national borders. If you find a great company, there are different there's a different regulatory framework in France than in Germany. So how do we can further develop the single market to a digital single market where businesses can employ and grow their ideas, not only, let's say, for 80 million potential customers, but maybe for 500 million customers. And I think this is the way forward we have to go in order to create this regulatory framework to find solutions, ideas, leverages in order to make a European approach. One idea, and that's something that we discuss also with the friends from France. Tomorrow there is again a meeting of the German Bundestag and the French Assemblée Nationale, the German-French common parliament, where we share those kind of ideas. And one topic that we are pushing in this area is the idea of creating an ecosystem of public data, so that the public institutions share the data, and small companies can use these data in order to develop their own ideas and to bring up European solutions. One last example, this also comes to my mind when we think of the Corona crisis. Currently, we are using this video conference tool, Zoom. And I'm not finger pointing at anybody here because we, as the Greens—
It is working.
It is working, and we use it as the Greens. And you can't say anything. So it's working, and that's all that matters. But all the other tools, and probably you have also by the meantime installed 6 or 7 other video conferencing tools. They're all American. Yeah, I'm asking myself, why is there not a German or at least a European solution? I mean, we have great founders, we have great tech companies, SAP and others, companies that have built this Corona app. I think we have also the abilities and the skills and the people to bring up ideas from Europe to all over the world. So I think this is a strategy we have to go forward. And this is not only about competitiveness. This is also about technological sovereignty, especially when it comes to question on China, which are difficult also from an ethical perspective. Yeah. And I think, and I hope this is a topic that the German government is pushing forward in the second half of this year in the European Council.
Perfect, Daniel. Thank you so much. A very brief question, and I'd like to have a very brief answer from Svenja Falk. Svenja, when you look at kind of the sentiments and the mood in the German industries at the moment, I mean, just like how I perceive it, I mean, the automotive sector wasn't that happy about the cash for clunkers not happening. So what would you say, like how willing are German industries to actually modernize, to actually don't letting this crisis go to waste and really use it to become more modern in the most encompassing sense?
COVID-19 has been an enormous catalyst, and some of the trends that we have seen in the industry have become far more pronounced. So I think it has become far more urgent. And sort of the ability of the industry to digitize, which is not only to sort of sugarcoat their products with digital services, but starting with a digital mindset is what is needed. And I think the message has arrived.
Perfect. That was like the perfect answer. So now we're going to go into the breakout groups. Breakout group number 1 is going to be me on the topic of transformation. Then we're going to have group number 2 on regional imbalances, which is going to be facilitated by Daniela Blaschke. And number 3, institutions for change, Lutz Macher. And now if you all changed your names in the Zoom call, we're going to go into the breakout groups and then back to the plenary. And for those who are watching via stream, we are happy to share our results once we are done. So now we are switching to the breakout rooms. And if I don't get the chance again, thank you so much, Danyal, Svenja, and Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Was a pleasure.
Thanks to you.
So could the backend basically move us to the rooms? So what we're gonna do now in the remaining minutes, if you all can hear me, yeah? Okay, cool. So what we do now in the remaining minutes is to do like a very, very brief presentation of what we've been discussing in the different groups. And I just did that to my group, so I'm gonna do it again. So what we basically did was to talk a little bit about what can we do to restart the economy without falling back to business as usual? And we discussed some kind of concrete policies. Sophia Spornraft, for example, talked about, can we use the tool of real prices where, you know, the ecologic footprint, for example, is being taken account for as a way to actually steer economic modernization in the right direction. And then we talked a little bit about issues of productivity and innovation, and what is the right definition of productivity, and if there isn't a case for progressives to actually expand the definition of productivity. And then we talked about what we call like a triple divergence basically in productivity, right? Where we see diverging productivity when it comes to different groups of employees, but also different groups of companies and regions. And that it is really one of the main challenges progressives are facing when it comes to modernizing the economy, to really address these divergences in productivity. And then finally, we talked about new business models and startups, particularly about platforms, and really about, I mean, Rob told us not to have too of a rosy picture of the US and what is happening there in terms of innovation, but we really discussed about platformization and not having a too narrow concept of what a platform is, but really seeing platformization as a massive shift that is happening in all industries, and capitalizing as Europeans at what we are basically good at, right? And making use of this transformation with regard to new business models, building on the capacities and the strengths we actually do have economically. So basically, that was the debate we had. And now I want to go to group 2. There was Daniela Blaschke. So Daniela, what have you been discussing?
Thank you, Max. We've been discussing regional imbalances and started off by talking about the image that comes to our mind when you say regional imbalances. This is the classic rural versus urban divide, so the countryside and the metropolitan areas. We did address in the first statements that, of course, you can discuss this within the German context. You need to discuss it in the European context and also globally. But in the end, to be honest, we had quite a German discussion, as we were a German breakout session in a way. The general analysis, to start off with that, is that urbanization means basically you have fewer people who need to maintain the same space still out there in the countryside. And we do see sort of vicious cycles when it comes to public investments. Usually there's a defunding rather going on, thinking about public transport, for example, which just doesn't run anymore if more and more people move elsewhere. The countryside or rural areas have for long been talked about under socioeconomic aspects and poor perspectives of people living in the countryside in this regard. And we have to acknowledge that at least in East Germany, where we see a few examples, public funding did not create the momentum needed in the past to really revive or revitalize these areas completely. There are some best practices that we should look at more closely because their things have worked in the past years, but this is not a general rule. So transition mechanisms should be working bottom up, also to include a lot of local stakeholders. What we do see currently after COVID-19 especially is people moving to the countryside where they can work remotely. But the idea should not be to build sort of Raumschiffe, UFOs, and spaceships, and have them not connected to the local communities, but to really form a connection and to also form a new narrative for the countryside in these local communities.
Thank you very much indeed. And then over to Lutz.
Thank you, Max. Yeah, we were also a German group, so we discussed it in German as well, but it really is a great connex to what Daniela was just talking about, because we were also talking about the fundamentals that are needed, access to broadband, technological resources, or further trainings for employees and so on. And we talked about a couple of things that Rob, Danyal, and Svenja were especially mentioning around the resilience theme of current institutions and the current regulatory framework and governance structures. Danyal mentioned, for example, that we should foster a decentral approach because resilience is an asset. And in our group, we wanted to combine that effort because both is correct. The decentral approach to foster ecosystems that are not only focusing on the economical impact, but also on the societal impact or ecological impact, but also a combination of a combined responsibility, for example, in digital ministry instead of think silos. So what we also discussed was a more user-centric policy approach, as for example in the GDPR going forward, focusing on the individual rights implemented in digital transformation that would certainly affect the stuff that Rob was talking about around automation, around robotics, and the stuff that Svenja was talking about around the deployment of AI going forward and the competitiveness between the EU and China.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lutz. This session was kind of a tour de force, and we have to stop in a couple of minutes. I found it very, very inspiring, to say the least. And I guess in the end, what it comes down to is, you know, as progressives, we do have to fight two kinds of naivety, right? The first naivety being that we can keep our standards of living without making use of technological process, and the other naivety being that basically technological process is in a way magically, automatically turning into societal progress, right? And it actually needs design, it actually needs shaping policies to turn technological progress into societal progress. And that what we see now as fancy, shiny new technologies that are super impressive can function as catalysts in both directions, right? I mean, they can make our societies more equitable, more ecological, sane in a way, you know, but they can also work in the other direction when it comes to political stability, when it comes to polarization, when it comes to all different kind of, you know, disruptions and tensions in our societies. So I think there is really a role to play for progressive actors in business, in media, in government and in society to really fight for this kind of shaping technological transformation in the right direction. And that is what we kind of set out to with this session. And I guess that's it for now and today. We're going to have two more sessions in this series of Tech for Society. This was the first one. Thank you so much to all of you for joining this session, remote, abroad, here in Berlin, around the corner, in the next room, wherever. And I wish you all a nice summer evening, wherever you are. And it was a pleasure to be here with you. Bye-bye.